Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Week 6 review looking at Empire in China. And certainly at this point in time, we really need to start discussing the impact and importance of Confucianism, as Confucianism really becomes a main component of the ideological base within Chinese society moving forward for really the next couple thousand years, and becomes very central and very important to Chinese ideology, Chinese government, and to the eventual stability that a lot of these Chinese dynasties and empires are able to achieve. So, thinking about Confucianism, just doing a quick comparison, what similarities and differences do you notice between Confucianism and some of the other religions we have studied so far this semester? Looking at Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Zhao religion, and Zoroastrianism. And a lot of people pointed out that in all cases, relationships seem to make a big difference. Certainly, that kind of relationship between human components is central to Confucian ideology. But within Mesopotamian ideology, you have relationships between the king and the gods, and then the gods and their people. Within Egypt, you have an even kind of stronger link between the gods and the rulers, and then the rulers and the rest of the people. Same thing with Zoroastrianism. You can think of kind of the main impact that that had on the Persian rulers and the Persian ideology. So you can kind of see some clear similarities there between these different religions, the relationships that they purport, and Confucianism. Of course, Confucianism is really much more focused around the human relationships, but still kind of that level between the authority figure and the rest of civilization is still recognized and supported by Confucianism, as a lot of Confucianism has to deal with sort of knowing your place in the hierarchy and respecting those both above and below you, and that is the best way to kind of achieve tranquility within a society. But certainly, I would say that, and a lot of your answers reflected this, is that there was a lot more differences within Confucianism and these other religions, particularly because Confucianism really does not deal with a higher power, with kind of mythological figures, and much more sort of deals with everyday philosophy between human interactions and the proper way to relate with government system, relate with your family, relate with your neighbors. And that's really the focus of Confucianism, and kind of takes the divine aspect of human interactions out of the equation to a large degree. So some very good ways of pointing that out. Another thing you might be able to notice is that Confucianism, for the most part, is a relatively optimistic philosophy, thinking that people are sort of inherently good, and that they want to be sort of fulfilling these goals in the right way, and that through knowledge and through education, people can kind to become more humane and kind of embrace this idea of humanness. Certainly, humaneness that we were talking about in the document exercise from this week. In that respect, I think you can call it rather very similar to kind of the Egyptian religion and philosophy that was much more positive and optimistic. Of course, Confucianism can be seen in contrast to legalism, this other Chinese philosophy that had a much more pessimistic view of humanity and the human condition, and that people sort of need to be constrained with really rigid laws to force them to kind of behave and to do the right thing. Whereas Confucianism was much more about embracing the goodness in people, and that if you provided people sort of with the incentive to do good things, that they would do it, not necessarily having strict rules, regulations, and punishments if they did something wrong. So I think you can make some interesting comparisons between Confucianism and legalism and some of the other religions that we have talked about thus far. Going on to question number 2, despite being different religions, many people followed both Taoism and Confucianism at the same time. These religions work together to form the base of Chinese religious thought. And of course, even considering Confucianism a religion is somewhat problematic, because it is, although it does have some religious components as far as kind of the interaction between people, and sort of how that becomes sort of a worldview so to speak, is kind of the way it can be viewed in a religious aspect. But like I said, as we talked about in question number one, rather problematic even to see it as a religion, as opposed to Taoism, which has many more of kind of the hallmarks that we might think of when we think of religion, as far as kind of a much more spiritual aspect to it. And I think that might be one of the reasons why they work well together. They both have worldviews that are not necessarily exclusionary, that don't rule out kind of other philosophical ideas. And Confucianism, because it doesn't kind of purport to establish and follow one particular deity or group of deities, that really these laws or these rules which Confucius is promoting are really kind of social laws and social contracts that people are making and operating between one another that would fit very well with another religion that does have more of kind of that spiritual aspect to it. And that's really where Taoism comes in. And as Taoism is very in tune with, spirituality, helping people commune with nature and with each other, it certainly does not work at all in any way opposite of Confucianism or as opposed to Confucianism. So that I'd say that's the main reason that they work so well together, as that Confucianism really provides kind of the social and moral aspect of kind of the religion or religious aspect, whereas Taoism focuses much more on sort of the spiritual, personal aspect of the religion. So you have spiritual versus kind of more mundane or practical. You also have so that they, even though they are contracting, they sort of fulfill different needs that people might have within their lives, which is another reason why they were probably able to work together for so long. And eventually, once Buddhism makes an appearance within China, you'll see Buddhism fulfilling a very similar role to Taoism. In some cases, it works very well with Taoism, and that you certainly see Taoist elements present in Chinese Buddhist philosophy. Eventually, you're going to start seeing Buddhist elements present in Confucian ideology, and Confucianism has a much more kind of spiritual nature imported into it in Neo-Confucianism, which we'll be talking about towards the end of the semester. But the fact that all of these religions were relatively open to combining different ideologies and belief systems, and were not really exclusionary, meant that they could all fit together and work to pretty much fulfill the spiritual as well as the moral needs and functions of an individual within Chinese society. So what social and cultural aspects of Shi Hongdi and the Qin Dynasty can the Terracotta Army reveal? Certainly, I mean, the first thing you have to think about is the incredible amount of kind of power centralized around this king and this figure, right? And the idea that they were able to get all these resources together, all these artisans together to create this incredibly detailed army and replica of the army to be buried with him. Also, the fact that it was likely that this kind of terracotta army was supposed to sort of fill in for the sacrifices to protect the emperor in the next life, and that. It's probably a pretty tough sell to ask an entire army to sacrifice itself to protect the ruler or the leader in the next life, and that probably wasn't going to go over real well with the people who had all of the weapons. So this was probably kind of a next best thing for Shi Hongdi after he was going to pass on to the next world, to kind of have this terracotta army be as detailed as possible to come with him to watch over him in the afterlife without having to bother trying to get a large number of armed soldiers to to kill themselves as a part of this, which probably wouldn't have gone over too well. But certainly you can see the large amount of power and organization that the Qin dynasty displayed being present here with the Terracotta Army, and you can kind of take these same aspects and apply them to the beginnings of the Great Wall and the other kind of public works projects that went along with the Qin dynasty as well. So how was a large bureaucratic class, the Mandarins, useful and in some ways necessary for a civilization like China? And really, this comes down to organization. The fact that China was so large and had so many moving parts to it that the only way to try to have any kind of centralized authority was to break that authority up and make it much more regional, much more localized, and have it run through a class of people, in this case the Mandarins, which are very much kind of entirely trained and entirely bent upon kind of maintaining order, maintaining stability, and running things in their own provinces and on the local level. And that only when it's absolutely necessary to kind of bump things up to the next level of administration. So that, kind of as counterintuitive as it might seem, the best way to have kind of an overarching political structure was to make it in some ways broken into manageable bite-sized pieces. And that only kind of a continual process and a continual class of people who could fill these roles, in this case the Mandarins, was going to be one of the best ways in order to do that and to keep the process running. Because as soon as that process begins to break down in a country as large and diverse as China, it's going to be incredibly difficult to rebuild that again. And that's one of the things that you really see happening from one dynasty or one ruling group to the next, is that they do take on these same elements and they do incorporate the bureaucratic class and, for the most part, Confucian ideology in their kind of ruling mechanisms, and that the same basic structure of kind of this bureaucratic governmental class that is supposed to be kind of based around the writings of Confucius and the social stability that his kind of relationship model is supposed to bring, and applying those to a smaller subset of the Chinese population was one of the only ways that you were going to be able to get some sort of centralized authority to be able to control and regulate such a large group of people. So the Han Dynasty set the stage for almost all Chinese dynasties to follow. And what aspects of the Han Dynasty do you think could have been or should have been adopted by future Chinese dynasties? And yeah, I mean, you can go down the list. First of all, Confucianism being perhaps the most important. The fact that the Han Dynasty embraced Confucianism as kind of its main ruling ideology, and the fact that that got passed into the Mandarin class, and that class really helped maintain the empire for thousands of years after this time period, keeping it kind of together and combined, even when at the top there might have been dissent and change in rulership, change in leadership. The fact that there was always this kind of mechanism and this structure in place to organize and run the country, very, very important. The trade that is developed under the Han Dynasty, the development of overroad trades, the Silk Road, trading with Central Asia, trading with the Near East. Of course, this becomes incredibly important to later Chinese dynasties. And eventually, the overseas trade routes in the Indian Ocean trade network become incredibly important as well to future Chinese dynasties. So that really, if you take a look at all the future dynasties to come, to one shape or form or another, they can trace their way back to the Han Dynasty. Rather similar with a lot of the empires that we see developing in the Near East, having their roots with the Persian Empire. And that I think you can make a pretty interesting parallel there. All right. Oops. Let's get over to our document here. So, a lot of people had a lot of very good ideas and took some very good parts, I would say, out of both our Confucius document and our Laozi document. And looking particularly at Zhen and humanists, and really how this promotes kind of the humanistic ideals of Confucianism. This idea that the goal of Confucianism is this kind of awareness and respect for all men, saying the master said that Zhen or humanist is the love of all men, and that it is knowledge, as all men can know it. Going down to this section right down here, this idea of reciprocity, right? That kind of an articulation of what we might think of today as the golden rule, that what you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. That this becomes a big part of this, the importance of justice and kindness, and using justice to kind of promote this humanness within the civilization becomes very important to Confucius. Um, and that you really see the heart of what the religion is and how it can be kind of passed on and mastered, and not just the fact that people are doing this for their own sake, but that they're passing it on to others, right? Establish others. There you go. This idea that it's not enough to simply try to create this idea of humanness for yourself, but you're trying to establish it and support it in others. Wishing to enlarge himself, he seeks to enlarge others. So, definitely a great quote. A lot of people chose that one to put into their documents, and that was a very good call. Also, moving on to this idea of learning and teaching on the part of Confucius, the idea that kind of by nature all men are alike, and by practice they get to be wide apart. That kind of through learning and teaching is really what separates one person from another. Those who are born with possession of knowledge are the highest class of men. Those who learn or so readily get possession of knowledge are next. Those who are dull or stupid and yet compass the learning are another class. And those who are dull and stupid and yet do not learn are the lowest class of people. So pretty much the idea that kind of knowledge and the accumulation of knowledge is very important to Confucianism, and to once more this idea of kind of spreading knowledge between people is very important as well. And a lot of people did a very good job pointing that out. Um, and kind of articulating the idea down here in Passage 29 as well, to have faults and not reform them. This indeed should be pronounced having faults. The idea that no one is perfect to begin with, but it's not necessarily the end goal, and that you should be trying to improve upon your faults here, trying to make yourself a better person within kind of the Confucius model, and that even if you're not there right away, really the only crime is trying to not get there, is trying to not get more knowledge, trying to not become better. The wise are free from perplexities, the virtuous from anxiety, and the bold from fear. So once more, the ultimate goal that Confucianism is trying to gain. Going down and talking about our Taoism source here, the Tao Te Ching, and certainly a lot of people pointed out that this was in a lot of cases a very sort of contradictory piece and rather confusing. And to be fair, that's kind of part of the point, that kind of the very first line here, the Tao that can be known is not Tao. So if you were able to just read through this and very easily be able to express what Tao is, I am sure Lao Tzu would rather feel that he failed in his mission. But it's this entire idea, and it's certainly not only exclusive to Taoism, but that really only true enlightenment can be found when you're not necessarily looking for it. That the more you look, kind of the harder it is to find it, and that more just by kind of sensing and experiencing the world is one kind of better able to perceive it. This could go very well in hand with the Confucian idea of just trying to gain knowledge, and that only by gaining more knowledge and more wisdom and sharing that with others, do you kind of inherently kind of become kind of more enlightened yourself. I would say the Tao Te Ching would certainly kind of support that kind of idea. Um, and once more, looking at a lot of these kind of contradictions, when beauty is recognized in the world, ugliness has been learned. When good is recognized in the world, evil has been learned. Kind of showing that there's always two sides of the same coin. If you want to think about kind of the ideas of yin and yang, that works very well with Taoism. And the fact that there's kind of these two different kind of parallels, and that they always go in concert with one another, and that as a part of that, sort of the best way to recognize it is to sort of be in the middle and to find a balance between the two. Also, a great impact here on nature, as you'll see nature coming up again and again. Nature is not kind. It treats all things impartially. Once more, trying to kind of promote this middle path through nature. The sage, therefore, is not kind and treats all people impartially, looking at all people the same because that's how nature operates. Nature is everlasting because it does not have a self. Once more, this kind of idea of nature being relatively very ethereal, but that, you can come to know it, but not necessarily by seeking it. Um, Also, going down to number 12, distraction, I think is a very interesting viewpoint, that too much color blinds the eye, too much tone deafens the ear, too much taste dulls the palate, too much play maddens the mind, too much desire tears the heart. Once more, this idea of balance in a very kind of world of equally balancing forces. And you could take the same kind of ideology and these same words here that we're seeing with Confucianism and apply it to eventually ideas like Buddhism and see something very developing, a system developing Buddhism, this idea of kind of the middle path that Buddhism promotes. And eventually, when you go on to talk about ideas in the Hellenistic Greek world, we're going to see very similar ideas to that as well. This idea that moderation is sort of the main goal, and the best way to achieve happiness is to sort of not be too extreme to one side or the other. And it's interesting how this idea kind of is embraced and articulated in so many of these axial age religions that we're going to be talking about: Buddhism, Confucianism, and eventually the Hellenistic religions in Greece as well. And a pretty interesting comparison that can be made there, and that we'll be talking about more in the coming weeks. But yeah, a lot of people took some very good passages out of this. But once more, I'm not going to mark you down too much if you were not able to completely understand what the Tao is, as it is a very kind of difficult conclusion to just get your mind around. And like anything that's meant to be very difficult to find if you're looking for it. But the fact that a lot of people just sort of pointed that out, and as long as you were trying to bring actual examples from the document, quotes from the document, and try to use that for your answers, you were still getting credit for those. As always, if you have any questions about this week, the primary source documents, my response to you, the PowerPoint questions, go ahead and let me know. Otherwise, thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all next week.